On today's Locked On Cavs, President of Basketball Operations Koby Altman said that the Cavs don't expect to make any seismic changes to the team this offseason. Let's take that at face value and dive into what the Cavs could do in free agency, the 2024 NBA draft, and on the trade market to take this Cleveland team from a possible playoff threat to a legitimate title contender.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Cavs. How you doing? Come on in and sit on down because, like I said, we're going to start diving into some possible free agency targets, and I'll break down how the Cavs can make moves in free agency despite a pretty salary-heavy roster that Cleveland currently has. But I got to let you know first that today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now with new customers getting $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. So, for some background, the Cavs could use their mid-level exception to sign players for a chunk amount of $13.02525 million, or for just commonality's sake, we'll just say $13.1 million. And that doesn't mean that they have to sign one player, but they can break it into chunks to make free agency signings this summer. They also can just sign players to veteran minimum deals, and there's a guy that the Cavs will have to have a conversation about, which I'll touch on at the very end of breaking down all these targets. But I think the biggest target, MLE-wise, for the Cavs would have to be Royce O'Neal. He averaged 7.7 points, 4.8 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and hit on 37% of his three-point attempts in 24.7 minutes per game between his time with the Nets and the Suns last season after he was traded to Phoenix at the trade deadline to try and bolster the Suns' hapless playoff run. But it is well known that Royce O'Neal has and will probably continue to be a longtime target of Cleveland due to the need that he kind of covers at the wing spot. I think also just the fact that he's close to Donovan Mitchell could help a lot a bit. And if Donovan Mitchell re-ups, and this is assuming, of course, in this scenario that you have a fully re-signed Mitchell, have him Mobley signed to a rookie max extension, Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen on the roster, and Mitchell could recruit O'Neal to Cleveland and kind of just provide a little bit more wing depth and a guy who is a bit of that 2-3 spot, which isn't ideal, but does have the size and at least defensive grit and also just, the ability to defend at the 4 as well if the Cavs ever wanted to go small. And he's just a proven success story no matter where he's at. Even when he was in a little bit of a weird situation in Phoenix, O'Neal still had a lot of impact on and off the ball, which is something that fits the need for the Cavs. But I think a guy that makes more sense in that 3-4 mold is soon-to-be free agent Taurean Prince, who did play for the Cavs in 2021, and this last season with the Lakers averaged 8.9 points, 2.9 rebounds, 1.5 assists, and hit on 39.6% of his three-point attempts last year. He's technically listed as a power forward now, but he's that 3-4 hybrid because he has the size, and he's more importantly just still, despite his age, an energetic wing who fits that 3-and-D mold, though he can sometimes put the ball on the floor and get to the basket if he wants to, but low usage guy, a guy who is comfortable attacking the basket in an isolation situation, if the shot clock, is winding down, but a guy that is going to give you a lot of defense, a lot of rebounding, a lot of grit, and also just a lot of three-point shooting, which is what the Cavs need from the wing spot. But there's a little bit of a caveat because he was on a Lakers podcast not too long ago and said that he has a desire to resign with the Lakers, so there could be competition. But moving further down the line, looking at Miami Heat swingman Josh Richardson, kind of in that similar vein to Royce O'Neal. He's a 2-3 type player, but he did average 9.9 points, 2.8 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and 34.7% from three-point range with the Heat this year. He is a plug-and-play role guy as a tertiary scorer, secondary playmaker, and as a well-rounded defender who's hard-nosed effort could translate well with the guys from last season that are being carried over on the Cavs, and also kind of just dabbles in a little bit of everything that you need in terms of just secondary playmaking, a guy who can act as a tertiary scorer, a guy who can hit his three-pointers, who can give you about that 10 or so points per game, which is ideal when considering how the Cavs bench floundered in the playoffs. And something that's definitely worth taking a stab at. But moving on, you start to look down a little bit lower on the list. There could be guys out there. It depends on what the Toronto Raptors do. If, looking at the MLE, rather, there could be a chance the Toronto Raptors decline Bruce Brown's player option. I mean, that's a guy you'd probably commit the full MLE to, but it's been reported that the Raptors are expected to pick it up. Ditto for Kevin Love, who I believe has a player option. He could decline that and enter free agency and re-up with Miami or be an option with Cleveland, but he doesn't have as clean of a path to joining the Cavs and refreshing the vibes. And I'll have an honorable mention for a guy on the lower end of the MLE, but looking at vet min targets to slowly, gradually working back up to lower MLE targets, Gordon Hayward. He's a guy I mentioned on yesterday's show when talking about Johnny Bryant and also just like the relationship Bryant has with Donovan Mitchell and also had with Gordon Hayward. I don't know if they still do now, but in his time between Charlotte and Oklahoma City last season, Hayward averaged 9.8 points, 3.5 rebounds, 3.1 assists. He hit on 41.1% of his three-point attempts. And more importantly, he's just a veteran wing that can shoot, and he can also handle the ball and create for others. And he's certainly not on the same level as his prime. I think that was kind of a window that opened and closed, unfortunately, due to injury for Hayward, but still possesses some of the acumen to be a solid defender on the wing and can be a guy that isn't like expected to play most nights. Maybe he could start minutes depending on the lineups and matchups or situations, but can anything just fill the role of a veteran wing while being younger than some of the options that you could sign to either a vet min or a smaller portion of the MLE and bring some experience as a volume scorer on a pretty cheap and team-friendly deal. Friendlier deal, I should say, not team-friendlier deal. There's the words I'm trying to form here. But moving up the ranks a little bit, Patrick Beverley, I think, is a guy the Cavs could look at, especially just because with Ricky Rubio's retirement, with Craig Porter Jr. not really having much of an outside shot, and you're not really trying to put the weight of the world on the shoulders of a sophomore NBA player. Beverly does make a lot of sense as a guy who could back up Darius Garland, plays a little bit of a two-guard off the ball because he's very comfortable playing off the ball. But similar to Taurean Prince, Beverly has expressed a desire to stay in Milwaukee, but it is worth noting that the Bucks are so cash-strapped right now that they may not be able to afford him. On the year last year, Beverly had 6.2 points, 3.3 rebounds, 2.9 assists, and hit on 33.7% of his three-point attempts between his stints in Milwaukee and Philadelphia. He's always going to be a defensive pest. He's a smaller guard that plays bigger than his actual size kind of lays out, and he can space the floor from three-point range off the ball, and he can just be a nice little second option alongside Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell, or if you want to get real freaky with it, maybe you put him at the 1 or the 2, and you put Mitchell at the 3, and Garland at the 2, or something like that, or Garland at the 1 as well, and you could just kind of explore those lineups and those mismatches, and just kind of look at things from that angle. And then finally, I think a guy that has earned his worth and showed it, especially when it matters most for Cleveland during the playoffs, is a guy that they should probably consider again, is Marcus Morris Sr. He averaged 6.4 points, 2.7 rebounds, 0.7 assists, and hit about 40.3% of his three-point attempts between his time in Cleveland and Philadelphia, with getting more of he would say it wasn't very robust, but I think he got much more just consistent playing time with the Cavs than he would with like Philly, or how his stint with the Clippers ended. But just more importantly, he just showed he has some gas in his tank. I think he showed the fact that like he's not a veteran who's just like absolutely on the decline and completely unplayable. And I'm not saying that he needs to be the starting 3 or the starting 4. You're looking for guys that could be plug and play support pieces for kind of the existing supporting cast of like Max Strus, Karis LeVert, George Niang, Dean Wade, and others. And Morris Sr. kind of fits that mold pretty well, as do a lot of these guys. But at least in Morris's case, he gives you three-point shooting and just an edge on the wing. And speaking of edge, the final guy to keep tabs on during free agency is soon-to-be restricted free agent Isaac Okoro. The 23-year-old wing had a solid fourth season in Cleveland, in which he averaged 9.4 points and 1.2 threes per game while shooting 39.1% from three-point range and providing some really stout multi-positional defense. Still, Okoro still doesn't profile as a high-volume scorer or a difference-making playmaker. You're paying him, if anything, in restricted free agency for the defense, and then hoping and praying that since he's so young and unrefined and kind of in a weird spot with how the Cavs both handled his development, just kind of handled his trajectory overall, that he would just continue to grow as an offensive player. But, keep your expectations realistic and you're never bound to be disappointed. And the current projections out there do say that he's slightly worth more than the MLE because of his position and his defensive skill set, and I think a lot of his upside as well. And the Cavs would probably prefer to iron out a deal early into free agency, and that fits nicely with their other moves, or they could face the eventuality of risking overpaying him or losing to another team that has cap space like Detroit, or Utah could carve out space for Okoro if they wanted to as well. But I think Isaac Okoro deserves more than a brief mention at the end of free agency targets and just free agency options for Cleveland at the end of a segment. We'll dive more into him on this summer. Maybe have some guests on the show as well just to talk about it too. Just kind of explore what Okoro's market is and maybe some realistic targets for him if he were to leave Cleveland, and also like maybe just the price the Cavs have to match. But Okoro could win big in free agency, but you could win really big right now with today's first and only sponsor, FanDuel. As I had mentioned before, today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you're feeling good about the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals, or whomever wins the Western Conference Finals between the Dallas Mavericks and Minnesota Timberwolves, and then maybe them winning it all, you can win big too with any $5 winning bet, resulting in $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. That's 150 bones, which, if you can't do the math, is 30 times more than the money you wagered in the first place. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Again, this is FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to Locked On Cavs, your number one podcast covering all things Cleveland Cavaliers. We're more than just basketball. And while you're getting your fill on us, I got to ask, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch right now to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for your everyday to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which, of course, features your team every day. We're going to dive in now to options in the NBA draft, because I am a firm believer that the Cavs should take a player they believe can make both an immediate impact now and also has upside for their future, just because they are limited asset-wise. They traded the farm to get Donovan Mitchell. This upcoming draft in mid-June will be the last time the Cavs have a technical first-round pick until 2031 without stipulations on it. So you want to be mindful and pragmatic of that, and I think that's when you start to really look at juniors and seniors with the 20th overall pick that Cleveland possesses, but also if you feel comfortable maybe taking an upside swing on a freshman that could contribute immediately, because the situation is unique enough where the Cavs could just present an opportunity to develop a player, but also have somebody who contributes to a possible title-worthy team next season. And if you just want to go with like the not very sexy kind of, I guess you want to call it low upside pick, you'd go with Jalen Tyson. He's a Texas Tech transfer that played at Cal this last season, and Tyson projects complementary skills to be a role player at the next level. He's a skilled scorer who can shoot from beyond the arc and attack the basket off the dribble. He's also a capable rebounder and defender, making him a well-rounded player. If needed, he can also play guard or the wing, or even in the post if you need him to. He can be a plug-and-play option that is more NBA ready than most. And I think some of the concerns with Tyson, though, is one, the age. He is a senior, and also just like the fact there's not like a ton of overwhelming athleticism when it comes to his skill set or overall game. And sure, I think that's a little bit of a flag in of itself. And if you're the Cavs and you're thinking, okay, this is the last time we really have a draft pick outside of second rounders for the foreseeable future, and we wanted to make more of an upside swing, that's where maybe you want to look at Pitt, swingman, I guess combo guard, if you really want to get technical, Carlton Carrington. Carrington is very similar actually to Karis LeVert as a bigger combo guard who can get buckets with his size and can catch fire at any given night. He carried Pitt more often than not with his playmaking, scoring, rebounding, everything in between, and did have the ability to get red hot, but there are limitations to that too, as fans know of his game overall. His skill set, though, could make him a rotation level player despite his lack of age and experience, where I'm not saying you throw him into the fire and either start him or make him your sixth man if you're Cleveland, but he could be a guy that you invest a little bit of time and energy and resources into, and maybe you view Karis LeVert as a bit more expendable as a trade chip. More on that in a second. And really just start to feel out the entire process and just overall feeling on Carlton Carrington. And maybe he could be that guy who's a little bit of your scoring six man. Maybe he becomes like a backup guard to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell in the foreseeable future that has a little bit more pedigree and upside than Amani Bates or Isaiah Mobley or Luke Travers or Khalifa Diop or, anyone the Cavs have really invested time, energy, and draft resources into up to this point. Just because, again, they haven't really had a first-round pick. Like, they had Ochai Agbaji, who isn't that great, and because he went from Utah to Toronto, and I guess is showing stuff on a bad Raptors team. But Carrington could be interesting if the Cavs really wanted to devote the time, energy, and, again, resources to make it happen. And if they really wanted to swing for the fences and, put themselves in the conversation to get LeBron James if LeBron decides not to return to the Los Angeles Lakers this summer. Bronny James could be an option at 20, especially with him being linked to the Phoenix Suns at 22. That would be certainly interesting if Bronny goes to Phoenix and LeBron signs with the Suns for next to nothing to just make one of the more broken teams in NBA history, because LeBron next to Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant is so much shooting. It's absolutely disgusting, but that's neither here nor there. If you just wanted to spoil Phoenix's plans and make us pitch at LeBron, sure, but like, jokes aside, Bronny, despite being on a bad Southern Cal team, despite the concerns that came with his cardiac arrest and maybe just, the pressure of being the same name as his dad, he is still a bona fide prospect with legitimate skills. He has good athleticism. He shot it well in high school and shot it very well at the NBA Draft Combine, and has that cerebral, high feel make-out to his game where he is able to make decisive passes and also just kind of be a multifaceted toolkit guy that can support the Cavs or any team that drafts him in any way, shape, or form. And it's funny, he compared himself and he models his set, he models his game after like Derek White. And he can honestly thrive in a role like Derek White or Alex Caruso, where he does contribute immediately and he uses his God-given size to focus on defense first, and he's just continually looking to move and pass the ball. And since he is a reliable three-point threat, and the Cavs probably would have a lot of three-point options on the floor next to Bronny in the event he did play, Bronny could act as like a safety valve, as like that fourth or fifth option on the perimeter that could just continually to stretch out the defense. And maybe just, develop into a very intriguing high-end prospect. And then maybe after that, the Cavs find a way to draft Bryce Maximus after that. And they complete the hashtag James gang for LeBron's last few years in the NBA. But that's enough about the NBA draft. We'll dive more into that in the coming weeks and days, especially with people who are much more refined and have much more of a robust understanding on certain players and prospects than maybe I do after, looking at some combine numbers, some tape, and everything else. And let's dive into the real meat potatoes of it all, just because, like, again, the Cavs at least have said they aren't actively looking to trade Darius Garland, Jared Allen, or Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell, but I think it is going to be fair to question whether or not they do make any moves, period, that aren't considered seismic. They're more on the margins, but they are moves nevertheless that could improve this roster. And I think there are three guys that are worth monitoring for Cleveland, and I think could improve their chances overall. More on that in a second. So, the first guy we really got to look at, and I think a guy that just kind of makes sense the most and could be a casualty of these fun-time Minnesota Timberwolves becoming suddenly expensive, is Mike Conley. It's fair to question, could like George Niang and multiple second rounders or Dean Wade and multiple second rounders, like, could the Cavs, I don't want to say sell low, but I mean, this is a point guard that is in his late 30s, is He's long in the tooth. Sure, he's playing meaningful basketball in the Western Conference Finals right now, and he's a guy that the entire Timberwolves team adores, especially with like Anthony Edwards saying that he's the type of guy that you run away from because it looks like he's gonna bite you. And it turns out that Conley had never heard that before. But more importantly, like Conley could just be a guy that works really nicely in this Cleveland ecosystem. Like he is a guy that is one very close with Donovan Mitchell. He provides veteran leadership, but on the court, like he grades out as one of the better, if not one of the best, off-ball players at his position in the league, and could very comfortably play that role next to Donovan or Darius, or again, if the Cavs wanted to get freaky with it, with Mike Conley, like put Conley at the 1 or 2, Garland at the 1 or 2, and Mitchell at the 2 or the 3, depending on the lineups, and just all three on the floor together. But there's ways you could plug and play and explore these variables and options where Conley can comfortably be another ball handler, shot creator, and also shot taker, and also just still has that high end energy defensive upside despite being longer in the tooth and maybe possessing just some of the attributes the Cavs kind of really need at the point guard spot, and also would at least address temporarily until Conley either is traded again or is retired. Could be a backup option to Darius Garland. Outside of Conley, I think Keldon Johnson, a guy that is the odd man out in San Antonio's future plans with Victor Wembanyama, Devin Vassell, and then their 2 first-round picks this year, and I think one of them will be worth something in their pound of salt. But the Spurs are leveling up, and Johnson was a guy who went from a starter to being benched, and he embraced the role, but like he could be looking for a starting opportunity, and funnily enough, could be an opportunity for the Cavs to right a wrong of taking Dylan Windler over him, despite taking Keldon Johnson initially and then pivoting to Windler at the last second based on what Shams Charania had tweeted in the fracas of that whole situation. But Johnson isn't great defensively, but he is a bucket getter that can kind of score at all 3 levels. He can get to stretch the floor a little bit, and he's just kind of a guy that can be a plug-and-play scoring option that either starts or comes off the bench, but kind of finds ways to keep Cleveland dynamic offensively as a little bit of a safety valve whenever things get bogged down a little bit, and just allows the Cavs to kind of keep, more importantly, the ball moving and just kind of keep things from sticking. And you have to ask, like, is Karis LeVert and a couple second rounders worthwhile for San Antonio? Or, if Koby Altman doesn't stay true to his word, despite, the ethos of this entire episode, like, he could be a piece or chip that comes back in the event like Darius Garland goes to San Antonio. And I think obviously you want more than Keldon Johnson. You'd like to shoot for like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson and one of those first round picks that the Spurs have this season to kind of keep adding young depth just to round out this rotation. But we'll see. I don't hate Keldon Johnson's fit. I think, it's giving you a lot more than Dylan Windler ever gave you just from the beginning. But you have to kind of monitor the situation overall and just be mindful and tactful on how you can proceed, and also just embrace this overall situation so that you can ideally maximize your opportunities on the floor with him. And I think he could be a guy that could be a fun little wrinkle for the Cavs, whether he's starting or coming off the bench. And again, like, is an accentuating supporting piece to the top-heavy cast and the established role players to begin with. And finally, another young guy that the Cavs might want to take a stab at is Golden State Warriors forward Moses Moody. He's a little bit in that weird situation with the Warriors where young players don't get to play much under Steve Kerr. Like, you're going to see, well, who knows what happens to Klay Thompson, but at least you're going to see a lot of Steph Curry. You're going to see a lot of Draymond Green. You're going to see a lot of Jonathan Kuminga now, just because Kuminga is like emerged as a legitimate option. I think Kevon Looney's always going to be there too until he withers away or something like that. But like Moses Moody was a guy that the Warriors took with a higher pick that I think they got for acquiring Andrew Wiggins, or was part of the Kevin Durant trade or anything like that. But like, trying to remember the calculus and trajectory on that whole trade. Is just so much going on. But either way, it could have come from Minnesota. It could have come from Brooklyn. There's a lot of places. I forget where the pick went. But Moses Moody was a top 10 pick who hasn't just had the opportunity really to shine. But at least when he's given consistent minutes or a chance to play under Steve Kerr, Moody has shown flashes of an elite 3-and-D wing whenever, like I said, Kerr decides to give Moody a chance. And I think, adding Moody gives the Cavs another option to start a small forward, or it gives them a lot of support off the bench in the second unit. But yeah, it's that 3-and-D potential, so it's 3-point shooting defense. I think he can provide a little bit of ball handling and creativity on offense as well as like a tertiary playmaker or anything like that. And I think there's a lot of fun little things you could do with Moses Moody, a guy who's reportedly frustrated with this situation in Golden State and could really thrive in a situation in Cleveland, whether it's starting or coming off the bench. Or at least he's getting consistent minutes and an opportunity to actually show what he's worth as a player. And it's fair to ask, like, would Dean Wade and a few second rounders do it? Maybe, but who knows what the Warriors are trying to do, because they're in that weird spot where they could start to suck around Steph for a little bit as they try to improve, or they keep trying to drag out this aging, creaking dynasty that they have, instead of mercy killing it behind the shed. But that's going to do it for today's Locked On Cavs. And on our way out, I wanted to remind everyone that Locked On is available 24/7 on Locked On Sports Today. Again, it's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for your everyday to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, just like Locked On Cavs, which features your team every single day.